So let's move to our final session, the keynote 6, a DevOps approach to QA, leveraging containerization to accelerate quality assurance workflows. And this will be presented by Mr. David Parker. He leads SmartBear's strategic alliance team, and in that role acts as one of SmartBear's key thought leaders in public events like this one. He is an industry veteran with more than 25 years of experience in the software development tools industry, having served in roles that have included product management, product marketing, business development, sales, and sales leadership. And this span of experience lends David a unique and valuable perspective on the key industry trends impacting software engineering and digital transformation. And also joining David this afternoon will be Sanket Shanbag, the technical lead of India's SmartBear. Round of applause for Mr. David Parker and Sanket Shanbag. Thank you.
Thanks very much for the kind introduction, and thanks for QAI for what a good conference. It's a great show. I was here last year. I think there must be double in the hall tonight, so I think it's very gratifying. I'm really happy to see the growth and the sort of the interest being shown in QAI and the STC. And I'm honored to be here today. So a little bit about SmartBear. We're a company out of Boston, Massachusetts. Company's about $130 million in annual revenues. We have about 525 people on staff. But you know, when I was asked to speak at the conference, I kind of went through a thought process in my mind, had a lot of options. And I was like, what do I talk about? You know, should I talk about, I don't know, like, do I talk about behavior-driven development or artificial intelligence? Because these are areas that SmartBear is investing heavily in, so maybe that would be something interesting. Maybe I talk about something like artificial intelligence, because it's a big topic. We've heard pretty much every speaker that I've been privileged to see today has had mention of or specifically talked to AI, another area that SmartBear has been investing in heavily, especially in our recent releases. What about some vertical? Like maybe we talk about, you know, open banking APIs or, you know, testing in the open banking arena, or something like GDPR in the healthcare business, other areas where we invest heavily in. And I think it's interesting that I had all these options. As I started thinking through it, I said, it's kind of interesting that I have all these options. And the reason I think that is that, you know, you can look at the software business, you look at software vendors like SmartBear out there, and I think you can categorize them in two ways. You have one set of companies that you can say, these are very innovative companies, and another set which is very ambitious. Innovative companies, they're kind of categorized by the kinds of companies that are thinking up solutions, new solutions to existing problems, new ways to address problems out there. So they're kind of the inventive ones. The ambitious ones do something similar, but they do it through acquisition. Interestingly, SmartBear is a little bit of both. We're very innovative, and we're also a product of acquisition. So, needless to say, none of that really helped me in finding what I wanted to talk about, except to say that I think that the topic that I did choose, which is in the area of DevOps and containerization, is applicable across many of these. It talks to Agile, it talks to DevOps and continuous integration and delivery. It speaks to any vertical industry you can think of, it's applicable. And so that's what I hit on. So today I'm going to be talking about leveraging containerization in QA. And I think one of the key theses I'll make here, one of the key hypotheses I'll make here is that by leveraging it, we in the QA arena reinforce our centrality in the software development lifecycle. So, here's the flow of what I'm going to speak to today. First of all, I'll start with the what. I'm going to level set a little bit on, First of all, I want to talk a little bit about the what. You know, some level set on the technologies that we're talking about today. Quick overview, won't spend a lot of time on that. The why. Why should QA professionals like us, why do we care about containerization? And why do we care about DevOps? really the crux of the presentation will be in the how. I want to talk about usage, ideas or use cases of how you might apply containerization in your QA workflows, in the SDLC generally, but in particular, how you apply them in quality assurance. And lastly, the who. This is the shameless plug for SmartBear. You know, we're in business. We have to sell software to stay in business. So this is the shameless plug for SmartBear at the end there, to talk about how we bring products to bear to address these issues. So containers, what it's all about. How many, raise a show of hands, how many of you in the room are leveraging containers? Overall, your operations guys, your development teams, QA teams, how many of you leverage it across your organization? A majority, it looks like. How many of you are leveraging containerization, excuse me, in the QA arena itself? Some, but a significantly lower proportion. That's what I would expect too. Because application development teams and operations guys, they've been flocking to Docker and other container technologies over the last, I don't know, the last 2 to 3 years since Docker came out. Mainly because of the speed of delivery and the portability that containerization and container technologies provide. They allow these teams to bundle application components and dependencies into an image and that can be run anywhere, whether it be on a local machine, a server, a cloud, what have you, without changes. And with containers, developers can work on applications without worrying about the underlying components, without worrying about the underlying dependencies, permissions, and so on and so forth. So those are some of the advantages. And developers and ops guys also see other advantages here, at least a couple of other advantages. First, isolating code to a self-contained function makes updating it much easier. Second, containerization lends itself to microservices architectured applications. And by leveraging that capability, by leveraging that capacity, it lets you take monolithic projects, large monolithic projects, and split those up into small, more agile development projects without all that, and you're losing all that big overhead. You're much quicker, you're much more agile as you're updating and enhancing individual components and then doing the integration later. And I'll talk about how containerization can really help in that context in particular. So all these ideas are good things, but it doesn't really address quality. We haven't really talked that much about quality. What about quality as it relates to container technologies? And how do QA teams leverage those technologies to add value to the SDLC in their organizations? Let me turn my attention very briefly to DevOps itself. DevOps at its crux helps address the tension between operations and development teams. Because developers and development teams, the development organizations, they're all about change. They're about building new features or building new applications and pushing them out the door as quickly as possible, getting them into production as quickly as possible. By contrast, operations guys, what are they into? They're into stability. They don't want change. Change is anathema to them. So when you look at the two, DevOps, the idea there is to balance the two. The idea is they're both valuable, they're both important, and you have to make amends to address both of those viewpoints and both of those requirements. And QA has a great role to play in DevOps. But I would say it's one that we in the QA arena have not really stepped up to yet. We haven't really stepped up to address, to really embracing DevOps concepts yet. QA has been traditionally much more focused upstream toward the development teams rather than across and really bridging the gap. And I think one of the biggest hurdles, one of the biggest problems that QA teams face, and one of the reasons that we tend to face upstream, is that We lack consistent access to realistic production environments to test on. Why is that? Well, they're expensive to build and expensive to maintain, and they're hard to share amongst your different organizations. And that's what containerization can do for development, for QA teams out there. It directly addresses that issue. So that's kind of the what. That's some of the level setting there. I know it's a quick flyby, but quick level setting on it. Let me talk about the why, some other reasons on why QA should be concerned with containerization. And because I really like this idea of containerization in its ability to reinforce the centrality of QA in the software development lifecycle, because it ensures that QA remains the broker between development and production. It ensures and cements our role in this gatekeeper context. Some of the benefits that we bring, that we can bring to bear from containerization technology include simplification. It helps overcome the task of maintaining all of the environment variables, all the environment and dependency variables that you need to keep track of, that QA teams need to keep track of, and have configured in their test environments, because these test environments come pre-configured to you. All of the dependencies, all of the environment variables come pre-configured. You don't need to spend time worrying about that. Speed, because you don't need to configure those systems, you don't need to pull builds from your build server. These come pre-configured, and so that saves a lot of time right there. But also, you're testing against a consistent image, and you don't need to spend time configuring that image either. I think it helps in quality as well, since you don't need to pay attention to all those environmental variables and dependencies and so forth. False positives go away. False positives related to that may have previously been related to environment variables, that goes away. So you're able to streamline your testing as well, and troubleshooting is faster. You don't need to check those environment variables any longer. They're going to be consistent. Lastly is risk. Risk is mitigated because now if there is a problem with the testing image you're using, you can easily roll that back. You can use a previous image, a previous container that you've created, and it's easy to roll back to it. And it runs exactly the same now as it did last week when you created that image. So I want to go through some of the basic scenarios now on how you might deploy these, some of the usage scenarios on how these tools might be deployed in your organization. Just give you some use cases here. I'm going to start with kind of the status quo. Those of you already using containerization in your QA organizations, you're past this. Those of you that are not are probably doing something like this now, which is a pretty basic CI workflow. And in this case, we're talking about the developer doing his unit tests here. Where the logo there is SOAP UI, a SmartBear product. He's doing unit tests. When he's happy with it, he commits his source code to his repo, and that's a Git logo, whatever, it doesn't really matter what it is, but that's Git. Upon commit, of course, Jenkins takes over, does the build, and API tests are executed against that. That's again the SOAP UI logo. We're packaging it. If it's successful, we package it and push it out. So that's kind of a very standard workflow. And the good news is that this is delivering huge gains to organizations and has been doing so for some time. This or some variant of it. There's a million variants of this now, but and we could add a list of tools in the SDLC and CI workflows that boggles the mind. But anyway, this is a real simplistic view of it. So let's take the first step and talk about how we might add containerization to this workflow. So we have the same idea. The developer doing unit tests here, merging his code, kicks off the build, But in this case, what we're doing, instead of just moving forward directly into testing against the built environment, the build service actually, as part of its build service, creates a container, and the logo there is Docker. The container's created, and then the SOAP UI tests, the SOAP UI Pro tests, are executed directly against that, where's my thing here? Yeah, against that container. The beauty is that that container is now portable, shareable, consistent. You can always roll back to a previous version. That's the beauty of this. You can also effect reasonable concurrent testing on that as well. Which brings me to the next scenario, which is really focused on doing much more concurrency. So again, we're starting out with the same idea, building, merging your source code, and then kicking off your build service. But in this scenario, what we're doing is not only packaging up the target application itself, we're packaging up the build, the testing tools as well, the testing tools and all of the scripts around it. And again, the idea here is we can do massive concurrency with this. Now we can share this across everybody in the room here to do their own tests against that environment using consistent environments, consistent tests, and consistent target applications. So that really massively improves and massively enhances the ability to do concurrency. And a really good way to take this to the next level is in this kind of scenario. And this is really focused on this idea of a good use case is a microservices architecture application where you have in microservices applications, you typically have concurrent releases by multiple teams. These teams leverage a shared application architecture on parallel code bases. They typically have dependencies with the components and services that are not owned by the team or organization. So it gets complicated because you have all these dependencies to manage. And a really interesting way to address that is to use containerization to combine localized or component level testing with centralized system testing. So this first part is basically what we looked at in that previous scenario. The first part is setting up your CI pipeline for that project team, for this team over here. You've developed this and you're working with these 3 tables here, these 4 tables here. They're also building a dependent API in your application, and they have exactly the same framework here as you're doing here for executing their builds and creating these containers. So you go through this scenario, the team goes through this scenario for the component build, and if it passes, the build is then promoted to the central server, as are the other dependent environments, and it kicks off a system build there where it links them together and kicks them off together. So the benefit there is, first of all, you get unit validation or component validation locally, and you get system validation with all of the components that have been previously validated. So it provides a pretty sweet way to address what has been a real problem for, particularly in the microservices arena, which is an area that SmartBear plays a lot in. This is really an interesting area. So coming into home base on this presentation, I had a pretty fast presentation here. Coming into home base here, what kind of requirements would you be looking for when you're looking for tooling to address containerization in your QA workflows? First of all, they need to be CI friendly. In other words, they need to work very nicely alongside your CI harness, be it Jenkins or Bamboo or Electric Cloud or whatever it might be. It needs to work well with it. Ideally, Your tools would have out-of-box wizards to help you configure and maintain your workflows. Ideally, it would be able to pull reports from that build tool, from that CI harness, and report on them from a centralized console. These are the kind of CI-friendly capabilities that you really need to have when you're moving forward with containerization in your QA arena. Second, it has to be container-friendly as well. So it's not difficult to use Jenkins to spin up the container, to containerize your application, the target application. That's pretty straightforward. But not all testing tools lend themselves to being containerized themselves. And that precludes your ability to do this scenario here. You need to be able to containerize the tools themselves and all of their associated scripts and all that stuff. So that's the second thing. And the third, it needs to be agile friendly. And I speak more I should have probably not had the capital A there. I kind of mean it in the small a context as much as, so yeah, you need to support Scrum and Kanban and stuff like that. But I'm speaking more in the context of it needs to be fast. The tools need to be fast. They need to be easy to use. They need to be cost effective. They need to have typically floating concurrent licenses so that all of the team can use them without worrying about license protections and so forth. There needs to be concurrent usage licensing. So these are some of the key criteria you might look for in tooling as you set up these kinds of frameworks. And believe it or not, SmartBear provides these tools. I know it's a shock, but this is one slide that talks to SmartBear's tooling. And over here on the left, on the horizontal axis, we have the kinds of applications we support, UI testing and API testing, and across the horizontal axis, these are the kinds of roles that we support with our tooling: developers, testers, and operations. And I'll talk to a couple of these in particular. Is that working? Yeah. So the key tools I would call out here are Test Complete. This is our tool for UI functional test automation. For anything with a web, a desktop, and a mobile application, that's Test Complete. Test Complete incorporates, I mentioned AI, it incorporates AI technologies, and really, it's this recent release of our AI technologies that really leapfrogged SmartBear's Test Complete and leapfrogged us up in the Gartner standings, for example, and we were just achieved top ranking in the Gartner Magic Quadrant last week for functional test automation tools. The other tools I would point out here are cross-browser testing, which is our test execution platform in the cloud. CBT is a tool that allows you to define and populate any OS, browser, hardware, and screen resolution combination that you can think of, and configure that in the cloud and execute your tests on it on the fly. Again, very CI friendly. So the idea being, here the use case on this is, say you're working on a web application and you want it to support Mozilla, Firefox, Safari, and Microsoft Edge, and you want the current and one back release, okay? And I want to test on those. But also I want to test on iOS, Android, and Windows. And also I want to support a Dell laptop, and I want to support a Lenovo laptop, and I want a Galaxy 6S, and I want a Huawei Android phone, I want an iPhone, whatever. Think of the number of combinations that you're going to have to maintain in-house to address all of those tests. Well, the beauty is you don't need to maintain all of those environments anymore. You can spin them up on the fly with cross-browser testing. And the other interesting thing about CBT is, say you have 20 different configurations that you want to test and validate on. Let's say each test on those takes, each test takes 3 minutes. And so you're running those in serial, it's going to take an hour to complete your test run. Well, with CBT, what you're going to do is spin up 20 different instances, 20 different configurations, and run those tests in parallel. You'll complete your test run in 3 minutes rather than the hour. So we're saving a bunch of money on configuring and a bunch of time on executing your tests. So that's CBT. Again, a very CI-friendly, a very agile tool, and very, very appropriate for these kinds of containerization technologies. Load Ninja. I mentioned before how some companies are known for their innovation, as being innovative companies. We released Load Ninja, a brand new product in the load testing arena, I guess it was a month ago, 3 weeks ago, at our user group meeting. Web-based load testing, cloud-based load testing for web applications. Okay. What about the idea that I said that we're big in the that ambitious companies do acquisitions? Well, we closed our acquisition of Zephyr about a month and a half ago, and it's really, I think, rocking the world. Zephyr is the most widely used test management tool on the planet. If you're using Jira, you probably know Zephyr because it is the most popular test management tool on the Jira market, on the Atlassian marketplace today. We're probably best known for our API quality tools. These are kind of driven by the fact that we are one of the open source leaders in this arena. You've heard of Swagger? Anybody heard of Swagger? Yeah, Swagger is a SmartBear invention. We open sourced that about 3 years ago, and as we open sourced it, we created a commercial variant called Swagger Hub. SoapUI Pro, many of you have probably heard of SoapUI Pro. SoapUI, the open source version, again, a SmartBear invention that we open sourced some years ago. It is the most widely used open source testing tool open source tool in the API space. SoapUI Pro is the commercial variant. LoadUI Pro is load testing for APIs, purpose-built load testing for APIs, and Service V Pro is our solution for service virtualization. It is our fastest growing product, is Service V Pro, and we're pretty excited about that. HipTest is just to finish up this discussion here. HipTest is our solution for behavior-driven development and continuous test automation management. So we have two tools in the test management arena. HipTest for continuous testing and BDD, Zephyr for a more enterprise, traditional enterprise test management solution. So that's our tooling there. And again, I believe these tools are are well suited and well aligned for the kinds of discussions I've been talking about in the area of DevOps and containerization. So that's all I have today. I think I've probably made up some time, and all to the good. Any questions before I vacate the stage? Anybody that's already using containers, you're not allowed to ask questions because I won't know the answer probably, so. Okay, thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. David Parker, for that interesting final session.